Lake Louise is a name known around the world, or at least they want it to be. Lake Louise's 2019 long-range plan has everything you could possibly ask for as a guest, and it's not just a wish list, it's already being built. Join us today as we go through everything Lake Louise has already done and everything that could be soon to follow. Now, this is our first time doing a project breakdown for Canada, and while the process is similar, it's not exactly the same as MDPs in the United States. What's important to know is that Lake Louise is located within Banff National Park, and as such has to have their projects and plans approved by Parks Canada. In 2019, the Park Service approved a huge document submitted by Lake Louise that's called a Long Range Plan, or LRP for short. It is important to note that government approval of a long-range plan approves the overall vision and allowable envelope of development, but each individual project must still go through separate review and permitting before construction. That's to say that an LRP represents a vision, while each new project is just that, its own individual piece. Lake Louise's LRP is a massive document, even in comparison to the other plans we've looked at over the years. Throughout its 436 pages, the plan accounts for everything from parking lot rope tows to locations of specific species of trees. The document acknowledges several different perspectives, but what makes it such an excellent tool is its approach to the guest experience, which is factored in throughout. My favorite line reads, quote, "Guests with children or walking in ski boots and carrying ski equipment can often find the several flights of stairs to be daunting at the start of the day or while returning to their vehicle at the end of the day." This is the type of nuance that you don't often see in long-range or master plans, and it's part of what makes this plan so great. The document also discusses a concept known as CCC, or Comfortable Carrying Capacity. Through a long discussion, Louise explains that the maximum number of people that can have an enjoyable day on the hill simultaneously is currently limited by their lift capacity, and at the time of writing was 6,746 people. At full completion of the plan, the CCC would see an increase to 9,346, which would be limited by the capacity of the trails. Most ski areas' CCC is limited by their lift capacity, so this already starts to demonstrate the value that Lake Louise places in avoiding creating lift lines. Also, contrary to most of the project breakdowns we've done in the past, Lake Louise has actually made a large amount of progress towards build-out of their plan. These recent upgrades have revolutionized the experience at an already legendary Canadian mountain, but we want to take a more detailed look at exactly what each piece has contributed. We'll go in chronological order, which means we get to start with the Summit Quad. From its installation in 1976, the Summit Platter served a handful of trails above the eventual top of the World Lift, along with providing easier access to certain portions of the backside. However, its trails generally weren't anything incredibly special, it had a low capacity, and the alignment was a fairly long ride for it being a surface lift. Thus, in 2020, the first wave of the reimagination of Lake Louise commenced with the construction of a new fixed-grip quad to access the summit, running in a completely different alignment than the old Platter. The new lift runs from the top of the World Lift up to a point just a touch higher than the old Platter unload. This offers better access to select backside trails, although it actually did turn some of the old lappable runs into 2 lift laps, as you now have to ski down to Top of the World from runs such as Headwall Bowl. The lift was built in its new alignment primarily to decrease wind exposure. You can see evidence of this consideration in the slatted backrests on the chairs that allow the wind to pass through. Regardless of its alignment, the reason Summit was built lies primarily outside of those pre-existing zones. Summit was built primarily as a stepping stone to open a 480-acre expansion known as West Bowl. Now, given that the old Summit Platter went to nearly the same point as the new quad, there is a point to be made that West Bowl could have been opened without the new quad chairlift. However, with such a limited capacity on the Platter, this would have likely led to exceptionally low visitation to the West Bowl terrain, rendering the patrol effort within the terrain not worth the squeeze. The West Bowl terrain itself mostly comprises glades, along with some bowls along its upper section. These are terrain sections that Lake Louise has historically excelled in even before the expansion, so one could argue that it's not the most life-changing of terrain. However, it is much more isolated and backcountry-esque, and the LRP calls it, quote, side country terrain. Despite the installation of the new summit chair, for several years after its opening, West Bowl was a 3-lift lap, requiring Glacier or the gondola to top of the world to summit. Now, for a long while, one of the chief complaints about Lake Louise were the lift lines at the base. On paper, a high-speed quad and a 6-person gondola doesn't sound too bad, but when you consider that those were the only 2 options for such a large resort, it doesn't make as much sense. Interestingly, Lake Louise did see a few seasons with 2 high-speed quads in addition to the gondola. During this period, the old Friendly Giant quad and new Glacier quad ran nearly parallel. The LRP does not plan to recreate this setup, but instead proposes 2 separate lineages that would ameliorate this base area congestion, eventually seeing 4 routes to get you from the base area up onto the ridgeline. The first of these has already been constructed and comprises 2 lifts. Firstly, constructed in 2021, the Juniper Express quad not only opened the new out-of-base link, but also opened a 75-acre expansion of greens and easy blues. This new terrain fills the gap that used to exist between the learning area and the gondola, as the progression used to see beginners fresh off the bunny hill, then dropped off 2,400 feet higher with only a handful of busy, steep options to get back down. We'll revisit a future aid to the beginner progression, but in the interim, Juniper offers a less committed step up from the magic carpets. For 3 years, Juniper was solely used to access its small expansion pod. That all changed in 2024 with the construction of the Pipestone Express. Pipestone is a huge lift for Louise not only because it's their first bubble chair lift, but because of its particular alignment. It serves 2 distinct purposes. The first is to continue the ride from Juniper up to the top of the mountain, offering an alternative to riding Glacier and Top of the World to get to the backside. It serves this purpose quite well, and at least over these first few seasons, the Juniper to Pipestone flow has seemed to be a touch quicker than that older sequence. Now, remember that West Bowl expansion we talked about just a few minutes ago? That's Pipestone's other, arguably primary, purpose. Before Pipestone, one would have to ski down to the base and ride Glacier, Top of the World, and Summit to lap the West Bowl runs. Now, you lap them via Pipestone and Summit. Granted, a 2-lift lap is still annoying, but it's significantly better than the extra pain of having to ski all the way down and take an out-of-base lift dealing with whatever lines it may have. At the same time that the resort announced the Pipestone project, it also announced the construction of 2 other lifts and a new lodge. First of all, for the 25-26 season, the resort announced that it would be opening the long-anticipated Richardson's Ridge expansion. This new terrain is anchored by a high-speed quad, and despite an original opening planned for the spring, an early finish on the lift construction and record-breaking early season snowfall allowed Richardson's Ridge to have its grand opening on December 17, 2025. Interestingly, this project was first approved in 1980, but approval was withdrawn in the late 80s, and the project has been in a holding pattern ever since. While it's not the flashiest on first glance, the new glade skiing it offers is excellent, offering a nice contrast to the mostly treeless Paradise area. As a small aside, I would like to implore Lake Louise to explore a new trail map angle because this portrayal of Richardson's is absolutely atrocious. Nonetheless, its new greens and blues also offer a new playground for lower-level skiers to get away from the front side. In this same announcement as Pipestone and Richardson's Ridge, the resort also announced a new high-speed quad called Sunnyside, which was to open alongside Richardson's in the 2025-26 season. It has since been postponed by 1 year, with construction anticipated for the summer of 2026 and opening in the 26-27 season. As it stands currently, the beginner progression goes from just a few small carpets to either Juniper or the gondola. Sunnyside will be installed on the skiers left of the current base area, opening up a few more acres of beginner terrain. Over time, more carpets will be added to both the Sunnyside and Juniper areas, providing a more thorough and enjoyable beginner progression. In fact, the Juniper carpets are intended for adult learners, and the Sunnyside carpets for children, which will only further help the progression of both of those groups, as each piece of terrain can cater specifically to the needs of its target demographic. Overall, this will help cement Lake Louise as a family-wide ski destination, and might subconsciously increase visitation more than one would immediately expect. The final piece of that massive announcement that included the 3 new lifts was the Eagle Ridge Lodge, which would be installed along the ridgeline near the top of the gondola. This was announced to open with Pipestone for the 24-25 season, but as of March 2026 has not commenced construction to the extent of my knowledge. This lodge would be huge for Louise, as right now the only true on-mountain lodge is the Temple Lodge, located all the way down the backside. With the new Richardson's Ridge development and following increase in traffic to the backside, we're reaching that point where a separate frontside facility is necessary. This new space would offer panoramic views and would also operate in the summer, allowing the Whitehorn Bistro to revert to winter-only operations. While not necessarily a game changer, this would offer a new, convenient option to stop into. Alright, that's everything concrete that has either been constructed or been announced. Now, this exceptionally long-range plan contains dozens upon dozens of projects arranged in a specific phase order, 1 through 8. For the rest of this video, we'll go over everything that's proposed in the order of the master plan, starting with Phase 1. Phase 1 includes Summit and West Bowl, Richardson's Ridge, Juniper, and the construction of the Eagle Ridge Day Lodge. It also includes an expansion of the Temple Lodge, as that lodge's location relative to the Larch, Richardson's, and Paradise zones means it sees a healthy amount of traffic that will only increase over time. Additionally, it includes a small lift called Prune Picker that would serve as access from the lodge to Richardson's, making it much more easily accessible without having to relocate the lodge entirely. Phase 2 is supposed to see the completion of the Eagle Ridge Day Lodge, along with the first parking lot redevelopments. Throughout all of the phases of the plan, parking at the Louise base area would increase from the current 1,950 spaces to over 3,000. The parking redevelopment would continue in Phase 3, which would also see the beginning of some snowmaking replacements and expansions, notably in the large pod. Phase 4 is where the Sunnyside lift replacement and beginner area is proposed, along with a new lodge in the base area called Whiskey Jack 2. The base area as a whole would be widely redeveloped and expanded throughout this plan, and would eventually look like the render you see here. The new structures are shown in color, while the existing ones are in gray. Phase 4 would also see large upgrades in the Tube Park, which is adjacent to the Sunnyside learning area. The only major project of note to the guest experience in Phase 5 is a small terrain expansion around Meadowlark. A pair of new runs would be cut on either side of the current run, making for some excellent long cruisers or bump runs. Additionally, the Marmot Trail and the Larch Pod would be regraded and gain snowmaking. Phase 6 would also see new snowmaking and grading. However, its major project is the Eagle Lift. The Eagle Lift is not a new alignment at Lake Louise. From 1971 through the early 2000s, a double chair ran from the Whitehorn Lodge to the top of Race Pitch. This allowed for laps on all of these runs currently near the top of the gondola, which are currently a 2-lift lap, requiring the gondola and Paradise of all things. Something commonly seen at these big destination resorts is that the runs flowing back to the base can be limited and crowded, and generally aren't the best lapping terrain. Installing a high-speed quad at Eagle practically opens a terrain expansion, and it prevents people from making as many trips to the base area, which is an objectively good thing. All in all, this would mark a subtle improvement for overall crowd flow. Phase 7 is a bit of an odd one because that's the phase in which the upper Juniper lift, now called Pipestone, was proposed. As we discussed, LRPs are not a guarantee of anything, and this clearly demonstrates that, as that part of Phase 7 was completed well before previous phases. Additionally, in Phase 7, a rope tow would be installed to allow for easier access to or from the Far Lookers Left parking lots. While not flashy on paper whatsoever, this could be more of a game changer than you might think. Phase 8 would see the final parking expansion and a new snowmaking reservoir built. However, its headliner project would be a lift called Meadowlark, a new high-speed quad completing a link between the new Sunnyside and Eagle high-speed quads. It would run from directly adjacent to the top of the new Sunnyside lift up towards the intersection of Eagle Meadows and Meadowlark, likely also offering access to Deer Run. This would serve as the primary lapping lift for those new Meadowlark trails we discussed in Phase 5, along with completing a 4th out-of-base sequence. With Juniper to Pipestone, Glacier, Grizzly, and Sunnyside to Meadowlark to Eagle, Lake Louise base area crowds would become a thing of the past. I generally like to think that I'm pretty knowledgeable about the major ski areas of North America, but off the top of my head, the only 2 ski resorts I can name with 4 detachable options from the same base are Breckenridge's Peak 8 and Palisades Tahoe's Olympic Valley. Breckenridge is the most highly visited ski resort in North America, and Palisades is up there too. Lake Louise is nowhere close. I'm sure there are others I'm forgetting, but believe me when I say that this level of out-of-base redundancy being built in this day and age would be completely unheard of. And that's a good thing. Lake Louise is making it clear they don't want guests' first impression to be a 30-minute gondola line. That's likely why Pipestone was constructed so early on against its position in the phasing. Now, we always try to approach this with a bit of nuance because we understand that not everybody agrees on this issue, but Lake Louise recognizes in the LRP that winter seasons are getting shorter and more volatile. As such, major work on the snowmaking system is expected throughout this plan, some of which has likely already been built. On this map, you can see in pink the major snowmaking expansions that are expected. Redundant options from the gondola, Larch, Richardson's Ridge, Saddleback Bowl, Lower Juniper, and several trails within the Top of the World pod are slated to receive snowmaking. It used to be that snowmaking was reserved solely for the couple of major routes down to the base area, but now we're seeing faraway areas like Richardson's Ridge and Larch getting snowmaking, which would have been insane even 30 years ago. Nonetheless, this is another huge enhancement that many guests won't even notice. Throughout the master plan, there is consistent attention paid to employee housing, with numerous expansions and new projects throughout the 8 phases. In a remote place like Banff, you can't expect workers to be driving up from the city each day. This is an issue across the whole of the industry, but it's truly refreshing to read a plan that has a concrete timeline and specifics on how it will address the problem, rather than a simple statement reading, "Plot X could eventually be used to construct worker housing Z." Alright, that's almost everything in the plan. Almost. There are a few subtleties that many others who have looked at this plan have missed. First of all, the Wolverine Ridge terrain, just lookers left of the Larch pod, is now officially off the table as it had been rumored for years. However, there is much bigger news, and that's Hidden Bowl. Although shown in every map, many wouldn't notice the proposed expansion of the commercial development boundary beyond Richardson's Ridge to the north and northeast. Ski resorts don't propose expanded boundaries without good reason, which almost certainly means that they intend to, at some point in the future, expand into this terrain. Hidden Bowl has been talked about for many years, and I understand it to be atop the wish list of many Louise diehards. Whether this boundary expansion happens or not remains to be seen as far as I can tell. However, even if it is approved, it doesn't necessarily mean a lift, or at least not immediately. This could very well become Hike 2 terrain or cat skiing, even if in the interim before a lift. Regardless, it's clearly not an exceptionally high priority, since it isn't explicitly mentioned in the plan. One thing that is explicitly mentioned in the LRP are the replacement of the gondola and glacier lifts. Since these are not in the phasing plan, these are also low priority projects that we will likely only see if there are mechanical issues with either of the lifts. The gondola is an older relocated lift, so that is certainly a possibility. However, with the new Juniper and Meadowlark out of base routes, there likely would not be any capacity expansion on a new Glacier 6-pack or Grizzly gondola. By and large, Lake Louise offers an excellent experience. This plan shows that they intend to stay ahead of the curve. Rather than waiting for the hour-long out-of-base lines to show the need for a new route, they built Juniper and Pipestone before they could happen. They're thinking about a rope tow to avoid stairs, building new lodges and revamping the base area, and constructing more new lifts than Vail has built across their 42 mountains in the last 3 years combined. This isn't a resort trying to become a long-term player in the Canadian market. This is a resort trying to become a legendary name worldwide. And if you ask me, this plan has all the makings to do just that. Often, these master plans are just fantasy wish lists. Mountains go decades without building their proposed projects. And then you look at Louise with 4 new lifts since the pandemic and another one lined up for the coming months. Some mountains die of thirst while others drown, and Louise is definitely in the latter category. Contrary to most plans that are questions of will, Louise's is a question of when. Someday, we might be riding Hidden Bowl, while others are still waiting hours to get on the gondola in Park City. It's an ambitious plan, but the track record says even better things are still yet to come. When they do, we'll certainly be heading back, and we hope you can all get to experience the magic too. As always, we'd love to hear any and all of your thoughts down below. If you enjoyed this video or found it informative, please consider subscribing to help support this stream. If you're still with us this far, I'd like to thank you all for watching. All my love, I'm out.